Here.
Councilmember Dodwell, absent. Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Councilmember Hopper,
Here.
Councilmember Nyhan,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo.
Here.
Good to go.
Okay, we have a quorum. Thank you. First item on the agenda is the minutes from the June 1st meeting. Does anyone have any corrections or additions? Or do we have a motion to approve those minutes? We have Lauren has
Motion to approve.
motion to approve and Larry seconded. Any corrections, additions to the minutes? All in favor of the adoption, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? All right, minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Rick, do we have anybody out there who's on public participation?
I do not believe so, Mr. Bertolino. I don't see anybody.
Okay. All right, we will then move on to Public Works. And we have the first for information item, and it's the update on the funding application, sadly to say, I guess, on Route 100 Old State Road. Rick, you want to comment on that?
Yes, sir. I'd be glad to provide a brief overview. As you, I'm sure, are aware, earlier this year, the department did submit 3 applications for federal funding for projects. One was for the Old State Road, Ridge Road Roundabout project, and there were 2 separate applications on Route 100. One for J-turns to be constructed at Route T and Pond Road, and the second for left turn lanes to be constructed at 4 intersections further west on the 2-lane section of Route 100. As I think you know, we were unfortunate in our requests. We were not funded and they were not successful in our submittal this go round. So as a result, we did meet on June 17th with staff with East West Gateway that do review the applications to try to get some feedback on what we might improve the next time with our applications. So briefly, I wanted to mention some of the feedback. Quite frankly, the Old State Ridge Road roundabout, I wouldn't say that we got a lot of positive feedback out of the meeting, unfortunately. They suggested, well, they basically said that the lack of crash history hurt our score, which is something we figured was going to be the case. We just didn't have much history with serious and certainly no fatal accidents at that intersection. They suggested that we consider the congestion mitigation air quality funding program. That's the one we did not do. And we might look more carefully at that one in the future. However, to qualify for the CMAQ program, you have to be able to show a delay reduction at the intersection. And the traffic study that we had done previously did not show that. So we couldn't show that we would actually reduce the overall delay by constructing the roundabout. So we didn't feel like that was an option. But moving forward, we can review the traffic study that was done previously, see if there's anything that can be done there that might change the results, such as updating the traffic count perhaps, and making sure there isn't a possibility for funding under the CMAQ program, because that is generally a less competitive program. I think the reality is that Old State Road, unfortunately Ridge Road, is that the funding programs are really geared towards maintaining the system. It's really difficult to expand the system using the program unless you have a demonstrated safety problem, or you can show clear delay reduction with your project. It's just very difficult to get funding. Those projects do not score very high, and that's really what we're seeing in Old State Road and Ridge Road. So we may want to think about other options potentially, rather than the federal funding programs, these 2 programs that are out there in the future. We could certainly revisit St. Louis County to see what their position is. Clearly, it is a county roadway, and they have an obligation to potentially do something here. So that might be the one avenue, is we renew that effort to see what the county's position is and whether they might be more inclined to fund this project or at least contribute monetarily to it in the future. So with that, I'll move forward to the discussion on Route 100, unless you want to ask questions or have a discussion on the Old State Road project in advance, perhaps.
Any comments for anyone? One, Rick, is it protocol that we would notify the HOAs impacted by that, just to notify them that we were denied, but we're going to continue? Or is that something that basically Mike should take up within his own ward?
That would be my preferred option if that could occur in that manner. I hadn't had too much direct relationships with the HOAs, frankly, leading up to the submittal. So I don't know that I have too many of those contacts. I would certainly be glad to do it if I'm provided or can be provided those contacts. I guess either way would be fine. I don't know that that's required, but it certainly wouldn't be a bad idea to provide that update, certainly.
Yeah, Steve?
Thank you. In my opinion, Mr. Galani and Mr. Garitano were the two that were pushing this roundabout pretty heavily. And we're supposedly getting, feedback from their constituents about that. I would think, in my opinion, it would be more appropriate for them to convey this information rather than some sort of a standard kind of an email from Rick. It's more personal, I think, and those two gentlemen are the ones that were approached and were carrying that torch about that roundabout. So I would suggest that we kick it to Mike and to Joe to carry that message.
Lauren?
Yeah, Rick, when I had looked at the chart of the projects with the ID and descriptions, I mean, there were so many that had sidewalks or even an overlay, which I really don't traditionally think of sidewalks as affecting any sort of traffic flow or congestion. So there has to be some sort of public safety aspect that they're waiting, right? I mean, how did they make their case for something like a sidewalk? Because that, I mean, other than traffic signaling and people crossing at an inappropriate place really shouldn't affect traffic flow. It's the pedestrian flow on the side. So maybe, can we get a hold of any applications that would be helpful to see the exact wording they use? Or maybe it's not necessary. I found it odd based on the descriptions for what was required and then what actually got recommended under air quality.
Well, and certainly, and I didn't mention, but sidewalks usually score very well and are generally projects that are very cost effective. So if you're upgrading sidewalks or adding sidewalks from the existing roadway, that does tend to score very well because, again, it's viewed as you're preserving the system that's already in place primarily. So we did have some sidewalks included in this application because I think that was part of the concept, was to add and connect sidewalks from Bridge over to Old State. So we did get, and that was probably the lion's share of the points that we got, quite frankly, was because we did that as much as anything. Again, it's just the policy, the programs are set up by East West Gateway in large part to avoid expanding the system, again, unless you have a demonstrated delay reduction or safety benefit. We're just not seeing it with the crash history at that location. It's just the way it's fallen out right now. I did make the note, we have applied for funding twice now at this intersection, and we've been unsuccessful in both instances. So the other key that, and I was going to talk more about this with Route 100, frankly, is the less money you ask for, the higher your score will generally be. So if we put in it for this again, we'd be very wise to ask for less money. Put our request in for less federal funding potentially the next time if we went forward with it. But I'm not real satisfied without a crash history or a delay reduction. We would still get funded here, but that is definitely one of the keys. It's just don't be as greedy, ask for less money.
Thanks, Rick. Steve, to your point before, I appreciate that you're saying actually the council rep should be the ones contacting the HOAs. I guess that spills over to Larry and you're in Ward 1. Same thing as we talk now about the J turns and the Route 100. And Rick, why were we turned down there?
Well, the short answer is our score wasn't high enough, but to be quite honest with you, I think in terms of Route 100, we probably stand a much better chance to get funded there. And I say that for a couple of reasons. And I referenced that the main takeaway that I got was to reduce the amount you're asking for. So you can kind of do that in two ways. We can slice the project in a smaller scope, or we can come at it asking for less money, or a combination of the two. So what they recommended was to take advantage of MoDOT's cost share program. Hopefully we can put in and are successful in that request. If we do that initially, we can get up to 50% of the cost of the project funded through MoDOT, through their cost share program, since it is on a state route. Then we turn around and put an application in with East West Gateway for the balance of the funding. The remaining 50% would be eligible for federal funds under the STP program. And at that point, we could do 80-20 for the remaining 50%, which actually is less than we put in for this go round. That combined with possibly reducing the size of the overall project should impact our score significantly. So I think that's what we would want to look at, is potentially reducing the scope of each project. So maybe instead of putting in for both J turns combined, we put in a project for Route T, we put in a project at Pond Road. Now, if they both get funded, we could actually more or less combine them together, build them at the same time. They would just be funded by these two separate pots of monies that have to be kept separate, but we could conceivably do that if they're both successful. The left turn lanes would be similar in thought, although obviously we have 4 left turns. I don't know that I want to split them out into 4 separate projects necessarily, because that'd be a little much perhaps, but it could be done. And again, the less we ask for generally is going to increase our score. So that was the thought, is to really take advantage of the MoDOT cost share program first. And that program, actually, there's like 3 deadlines that you can submit applications under that MoDOT cost share program. The first one's coming up in a few weeks. And then there's one in the fall on October 7th. It would be the one in my mind we should probably shoot for. So that if we can find out if we're successful in that one, we could then turn around and hopefully submit for federal funding under the LPA program. We did utilize the cost share program for this last 109 improvement project. If you're not aware of that, we did successfully get funded for some of the work that was done on that project. So I think with that, I'll certainly be open for any questions if you have any at this time.
Larry?
Yeah, Rick, on these projects, let's just optimistically say being deferred, are there other related projects that that align with the timing of this that should also possibly look at deferring those as well? Just for example, if you're going to do a sidewalk and you come back later and put in a roundabout, are there any other projects that the city has in mind that should be deferred because these are on hold right now?
I'll be honest, Mr. Rose, I'm not sure I'm following your question exactly.
Well, I guess, like if we're going to be doing construction in an area, if we have some other planned construction, would it interfere? Should this, say, a roundabout at Ridge Road go in at a later date? I mean, I don't want to see an overlapping project where we're on the same turf twice.
Yes, understood. Now, on our agenda tonight is the old State Road Shared Use Path project that will not overlap the roundabout project. That's what you're asking about, but
Okay, that's basically, I just want to make sure we don't have things that are overlapping, because I would assume that it's still, I don't want to speak for Joe and Mike, but if this is something they feels hot, I would assume they're going to continue to pursue it.
I would think we would be interested in pursuing it further, absolutely. But
Okay, thank you.
So Rick, are you looking for direction from the committee to say to you to divide up those 3 projects on the Route 100 and make 3 separate applications for the MoDOT cost sharing programs?
Mr. Berlin, I think it's a little bit early to get that far in the weeds. The one comment I made in the memorandum was that I felt like it might be wise that we, if the committee is supportive of considering the MoDOT cost share program, we may want to pursue that further and get some feedback from MoDOT, and that would probably be Ryan Piercy relative to MoDOT's thinking. And that's really Route 100, but we still have a little bit of time there, I think, to formalize our approach. And of course, the federal funding program for East West Gateway, I don't know when that's going to come out. I could certainly start following up with Gateway to see when they might think it's coming out, but typically that's November, December is when it comes out. So we still have a little bit of time to do some work, and I guess that was my recommendation, would be to follow up with MoDOT relative to the MoDOT cost share program to see if there's any issues from their standpoint of us submitting under that program.
All right, so there's nothing that the committee needs to do at this meeting. You can follow up on that with your own, just your own initiative.
I think that's what I would propose, Mr. Bertolino, and certainly when we have a little more information, we would report back to the committee.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Okay. If there are no other comments, let's move on to.
Yeah, my hand's been up. I
Oh, I'm
guess
sorry,
I'm not
Rob.
sure how to do
I'm not
that,
seeing
but,
it. Yeah,
yeah, Rick, you don't have to spend any time on this answer if it's a stupid one. I know it's simplistic, but my question is concerning the safety improvements on Highway 100. And I know they are well designed. I really like the plan overall. I'm disappointed we can't get it going quicker. And so my question is are there any ways to simplify the design? Because I know that, the requirement may be to have a complete shoulder, reconstruction, adding new, et cetera. And I'm wondering if there's some restriping and just take over the shoulder and not have a breakdown lane for the 200 feet it might require to do the J turn or some things like that. Is it possible for you to think about it in those terms, or does MoDOT constrain you completely from doing a less comprehensive, I would say interim solution? Can you speak to that for just a minute? And if it's just a dumb idea, we can move on.
Well, I guess I would say a couple things. There's 2 things we could consider. We did look, as far as Route 100 and the left turn lanes, we did look at and raise the question whether we could utilize the shoulders potentially and restripe the roadway. And and I know you drive that area, the shoulders were just not designed when the road was built to handle the volume of traffic that's on that road. So
Sure. So they need to be shored up underneath, and you can't just use them as pavement, or they'd bust up and go away. Okay, sure.
now,
All right.
in that thinking, well, really, with any of these projects, the one thing that I always think is a good idea, if there's a desire to do it and the monies can be available, is to start the design, hire an engineer, start the design, or at least do a design through the preliminary phase. And that way you can get a much better handle on what the expected cost is and what the impacts of the project are. And then you can dive into some of those engineering details with MoDOT to question, do we really need to do this? Maybe we can cut a corner here, be more aggressive there and save a few bucks and make things a little more cost effective. But until we get to that point of actually doing some engineering, having a survey done, we just don't know about some of those things where we might save some money. So I always recommend that being considered, frankly, for any of these projects, if it's a desire that we
Okay.
really want them and want to move forward. And then if the other thought is, if frankly, there is a federal infrastructure bill and suddenly there's a lot of money available, we'd be in a position or a better position to take advantage of it.
Awesome. Yeah. So I don't, how can we move a little bit down that path? Because I think it's really, it's a powerful idea. I mean, using the shoulder as the part of the paved roadway would require digging it up and making it a deep, 24 or 30 inch, road bed underneath, but that doesn't necessarily mean we need to, grade for shoulders and reroute the ditches and so on and so forth. It might not be, save us a whole lot of money. And I wouldn't want to do anything that's less than safe, but I'm just looking for ways to get this done as quickly as possible. I know Teresa Clark is very interested in having this happen as well. So is there anything that you can do or that we can do to move that ball down the road a little bit in terms of getting some engineering done?
Well, as the Director of Public Works,
Mhm.
I would tell you, we just postponed a project and deferred spending money
Okay.
on an
Sure,
improvement.
sure.
We're getting ready to go into mid-year budgeting. So there is an option
Yeah.
there. We might be able to redirect some funds
Okay.
from, say, one project to another. Now, there's a lot of needs, and I'm sure there's lots of folks who'd like to get things addressed, but certainly there could be that option at mid-year that we redirect some funds towards design of either all these projects or just one of them, or whatever the direction is.
Well, I would go with what you think is sensible, because I generally try to do that. But if there's an opportunity and there's some funds available, it's kind of up to you to make the case for the way we need to spend them.
Tracy?
This is just a general question. Going ahead with some of those engineering plans, does that get us any points when we would go in the future to apply for any monies, like show that, hey, they've already done this much and they're really honed in on what their costs might be? Does that get us a leg up at all?
It does indirectly. I wouldn't say it does directly necessarily, but in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, the less you ask for, the higher your score is probably going to be. So if we went forward with, say, engineering and we committed to doing the preliminary designs, essentially that's a cost that we're going to be responsible for, and we couldn't get reimbursed for that later. So what you're doing is you're going to say, well, we're going to pay for that up front, and then we're going to ask for a little bit less down the road, because all these projects, we included the entire engineering effort in the application. So from that perspective, you might be indirectly getting a benefit. The other benefit, as I referenced, is you just have a clearer scope of what that project entails, and what the cost is. So there's less chance for surprises down the road, because you've done the engineering, you've got MoDOT engaged in this case on 100 in the project and what's being proposed, and maybe you've come up with some ideas that they would agree to, that you could reduce costs in that manner. So it'd be more of an indirect benefit, I believe.
Okay. Thank you. For any other discussion on this topic? Rob, were you using your hands up, raised hand feature, or were you just raising your hand?
Yes, I had my raised hand feature up and it stayed on until about 10 seconds ago when I put it down.
I didn't see it, but I couldn't see it up. So just wave, okay? And I'll catch you.
Okay, sure. That's fine.
Okay. Rick, moving on. Is there anything else, Rick, you want to say about the Route 100s, or have we exhausted that subject?
I don't believe I have anything further on that one, Mr. Bertolino. I was going to check to see if I could make your settings change, so maybe you could see that raised hand in the future.
Appreciate it. Okay. All right. Let's moving on to the draft deer management plan. And Sergeant Wedling, this is your baby, so to speak, your Bambi, I should say. And I hope everybody had the opportunity to read through this. It's a fairly extensive document, and it's been a couple year and a half in the making. So, Sergeant Wendley, anything you'd like to comment on before we get into any discussion on the topic?
I'm just happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. I don't know if you'd find benefit in us just giving a rough outline of the goals and objectives of the plan, so everybody kind of understands that as a starting point. And then if there's any specific questions, we can delve into things further.
Anyone want further explanation? Lauren?
I just have a list of questions, so I can hold my peace if somebody wants a synopsis or ask away. Up to you.
Anybody? Okay, go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, all right. Well, I have had several residents send me emails asking when anything is going to happen, so I'm excited that I have a chance to hear from you and give feedback after the meeting. So I did have several questions. The first is, I know that there are many cities, you listed them, that already have that lot combination. And I was wondering, did they see a significant population reduction when people combine for hunting? And the reason I ask this is because I know that the task force mentioned that just doing the combination approach right now and not paying for a sharpshooter over 10 years was the best bang for the buck. But I'm wondering if we still need a couple years of that to kind of help get it under control in addition to the lot combination option. So are a lot of these cities, did they find that as well, that it took several years to kind of get that off the ground? I mean, you're talking about public education and getting people to sign up, and that takes a while. Whereas I could get somebody under contract relatively quickly while I'm trying to get people to combine lots.
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's really no data available to analyze the effectiveness of the combination of parcels of property to encourage and facilitate hunting in more densely populated areas.
Okay.
So we're kind of handicapped as far as that goes. There's just no statistics that are kept on that subject, unfortunately.
So what I'm worried about was that it wouldn't be enough, and I don't have a problem with having something with a fiscal note for several years coming across the desk of council. I don't know if everybody else agrees with me, but I wouldn't mind that as a recommendation coming out of this committee. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is, I believe was at Ellisville and Baldwin limited the number of lots that could be combined, and those are cities I think of that are already more dense. I didn't see it in there, but are you also recommending limiting the number of lots that can go towards the combination?
We don't have a firm recommendation, really. I mean, it would be more up to the city attorney and council to make that determination as to how you'd want to write the ordinance specifically. The committee's really just main recommendation is that ordinance be adopted to allow for the combination of parcels in order to allow more opportunities for hunting to occur. And that was a point that was really driven by Erin Shank from the Department of Conservation. It's her position that we make available the most tools to the residents and to the city to maximize the hunting opportunities in order to have an impact. So, you know, her idea and recommendation is to do things that will encourage hunting and you know, make it more available and possible for people to do so if they choose to do that.
Okay, I was just, and we've talked about this before, that there are just some areas that are so dense that, you know, doesn't matter how you put the houses together where they're at the lot, you don't have 200 feet of clearance.
Right.
And so I was wondering if the policy should say, you know, lots can be combined everywhere except in the, you know, the highest density town center, you know, regulating plan, if we need to have something like that. And I guess my temporary question is, does that need to be done at this committee level before it goes to council? I kind of wonder if council will just send it back to us if we don't add some of this. And then I wanted to ask about the notification of the surrounding neighbors. So when my first question is, what does advance notice mean? And we probably need to spell that out in an ordinance, because somebody could say, well, an advance notice is you know, 5 hours, as opposed to 72 hours or something like that. And my other question is once something has gone through the police department and is approved, so that, let's call them lots A, B, and C are now combined. It's implied, but it wasn't stated in the policy, that that's in perpetuity. But I'm assuming that it expires if there's a new homeowner in one of those 3 lots that never signed up. Is that correct?
It would be my thought that the agreements would be specific to a specific day, actually.
Okay.
You know, I think, you know, there was a lot of discussion and consideration given to, you know, the point of the notifications and having an agreement between all the neighbors. And then actually we discussed the police department actually doing a site visit before any of that would ever be approved, to make sure that the hunting site that's selected is safe. And we would actually have interaction with the hunters that are going to be doing the hunting. So we would see what their plans were, and we could ensure that they have an appropriate backdrop and everything was going to be done in a safe manner. And
Okay.
we wouldn't give that until, you know, all that occurred. So
Great. When I first read it, I thought that it wasn't specific to every single date, and that was one of the scenarios I had, is what happens when neighbors agree and then they don't agree on the date, and there's a children's birthday party and 20 kids are already invited, and the 3 people that had the agreement said, we're doing it anyway. So that fixes that scenario. So I would just leave it as, I'd like to add, either at committee level or council, more specifics, perhaps on the number of lots that can be combined, or any areas in the city that we want to exclude, and spell out what we mean by, you know, advance notice. And then my other question was, you know, HOAs were mentioned. I guess this is a John Young question. So a lot of my subdivisions, including my own, there's nothing in the indentures, you know, about deer hunting, because was never an issue before. There were never 3-acre lots. So my question is, as it is now, can an HOA say yes or no one way or another without anything in their indentures about it?
That's going to vary indenture to indenture. If they have the authority to establish ad hoc regulations or regulations from time to time, they can do that. If they don't have that authority and they don't have any prohibition, then they can't. So that's going to be subdivision to subdivision.
Okay, and the reason why I ask is some homeowners associations meet multiple times a year. Some meet once, like have an annual meeting, and that doesn't leave a lot of time to respond to something. So whenever this would be enacted, you know, let's just say this went through, you know, relatively quick for anything to ever go through council, and it was ready for the fall hunting season, but my HOA is already met. They are behind the 8 ball if they want to prohibit it or allow it expressly in their indentures, because they're not going to meet again to talk about it. So I was wondering, would it make sense to write the ordinance in a way that says the HOAs have to opt in rather than opt out?
I would actually say no. And the reason for that is basically delegating your legislative authority to those HOAs, which we really can't do. That's unlawful, unenforceable.
Okay, well, thank you for correcting me on that. That's all I got. But yeah, I'd love to see an actual fiscal note for an additional hunt on city property, and I understand that the 10-year option may not be economical, but we can still do something for a short while.
All right, Lauren, I've got Rob with his hand up, and then if I could, then Tracy, and then Larry. Is there one thing, Rick, I know you were starting to respond to something that Lauren said. If that's quick, can we have that response, and then we'll go to Rob?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Berlin. I was just going to clarify for the committee, again, the plan will not establish or will not allow the combining of lots. It's a separate ordinance modification that would have to be created and presented to the council for approval that would make that change. This plan would not make that change. It just recommends considering a future ordinance modification to do that.
Oh, my misunderstanding was that if we pass this today, it was authorization to proceed with the writing of legislation. It's not. We're not going to start writing it after we pass a plan.
I guess the way I would view it, yes, the Deer Committee would then start working on different components of the plan, one of which could be an ordinance modification, but that modification has to come through City Council for your approval.
Rob.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't see that this was on the agenda until quite late. But I did some work and dug into the statistics of the Wildwood managed hunts, the archery hunts in 2020 in Rockwood Reservation and Rockwood Range. Got a spreadsheet here, you guys. Well, it looks just white to me, but and I also have 2 pages of analysis of the whole thing. And there's too much to go into. I don't want to take up the entire meeting with this stuff, but I will say that I'm a big supporter of the Conservation Department. Most of you all know me as a woodsman. I've been an archer and a marksman my entire life. I killed my first whitetail when I was 12, and my first whitetail with a bow in high school. I am no stranger to this entire topic, and I don't see this plan working to do the job it was intended to do. The Conservation Department, sort of their job is to promote hunting, and so that's the answer that they're going to provide. They get 20+% of their revenue every year from hunting licenses and so forth, and so it's kind of like if you got a hammer, every problem is a nail kind of thing. And the statistics just don't support the idea that we can make a meaningful dent in our deer population by enhancing archery hunting. So I just have some questions here that I will mention rather than going through the whole thing. And maybe as a group we can decide how to proceed. I think it needs to be reworked. I will submit this statistical analysis for perusal of the Deer Committee, but I don't want to get into a big fight if I'm the only guy here trying to look at actual data for a plan that's going to affect everybody in the city. My questions are, is our goal the efficient and effective deer population management for Wildwood, or is it enhanced recreational hunting for 1 or 2% of residents and maybe twice as many non-residents if we fully deploy archery hunting? How did combining lots in high density subdivisions become a primary control action when there was more support in these surveys for no feed ordinance, programs to humanely reduce the deer herd, et cetera? There were only a little bit more than half of the residents that supported combining lots to reach the 3-acre minimum in the first place, which in my view is rife with problems of all kinds that I haven't seen discussed in the plan. Maybe it was discussed ad nauseum in the meetings themselves, but I attended one and all I heard was, let's expand bow hunting. It seemed pretty, the opinion was already, baked into the pie, so to speak. I don't know who, other than the Conservation Department and bow hunters, say recreational bow hunting is the preferred method for managing deer populations and associated deer-human conflicts, which is right in the document. There are management alternatives. I haven't seen the all-in cost options for council consideration, which is the way we generally do things. I haven't seen corroborating statistics and supporting data for the plan. There's independent peer-reviewed science that exists. We just need to agree on what we're trying to accomplish with it. So I can't support this plan just from a practical perspective. I do not see what I came up with was if we fully deployed archery hunting at the levels that occurred in the managed archery hunts citywide, figuring 30 areas of land, which is half of our, nearly half of our 66 square miles of land. We're only going to kill 270 deer, and we're going to have well over 1,000 non-resident archery hunters, in addition to the resident archery hunters, if every resident that's supposed to be an archer actually signs up for the program. So that's if we have, if the deer population increases as rapidly as biologists know it to do, we're going to get achieve maybe a 5% reduction. And that's going to go away, by the end of the next year because there's 2 fawns per doe. So I just don't, there's plenty of objections to this. I don't want to, ramble on any longer, but I can't support this. And I want to take the least burdensome approach to kicking this back to the committee and asking them to actually do, some of the things that the council is going to require. And the reason I'm hitting it hard as I am now is because I'd rather do it now than at a council meeting. So that's my spiel, and I'm looking for guidance on what my next step would be. Understanding that I will submit this the statistical analysis to whoever wants to see it.
Tracy?
Yeah, I just had a couple of general things to think about. I don't even know if there's answers to them at this point, but I thought I had read at one point that the combining of the lots to get to the 3 acres was only going to be allowed west of 109. But maybe that's changed. I don't know, but that is what I read somewhere. My other question is, it says identify and recruit large lot owners for I'm assuming that's where the managed hunts would take place. If you're recruiting these large landowners, it's not just them that are allowed to hunt on their own property. I'm assuming that they're allowing, I don't know how you do that. You advertise it or you get the word out to have people come on their property to hunt. I didn't know if there's liability issues for that for the property owners, if that could come up to be an issue and the property owners might not be willing to open up their properties because of that. And then the other thing on the no feed ordinance, and again, this probably doesn't have an answer at this point, but something to think about, like, how is that? Do neighbors call and say, my neighbor's feeding this deer, and then is there a fine involved? Is it just like a friendly visit and say, hey, please don't do this? Or, what are the consequences, or, whatever, if someone is doing that? That's all.
Thanks, Tracy. Larry?
Yeah, I guess some of my comments probably maybe altered based on Rob, what you were saying. I think what might be maybe not clearly written in this plan is that many of the options that are out there may be very expensive, which other cities have experienced. This might not be the total answer, but I do think it's a really good step in the right direction. before we moved to Wildwood, we lived off Wilson Road in Chesterfield. And for a good 10 years, we had basically the same 3 hunters hunt the common ground within the properties. And I would say that it did make a dent for our area. And in our area too, we also saw an increase in the density only because of adjacent construction. So they would bow hunt. Everybody was notified. It actually went really smooth, and I think it was very effective for our subdivision, which was 92 homes. The main question I was going to bring up is I do deer hunt on my property, and I usually am successful with 1 deer. Is there any stats as to how many people hunt in Wildwood and how many deer are taken through the regular Department of Conservation permitting process? And what I'm wondering is that there's places where I've hunted before where, depending on your location, you'll get a bonus tag. And I don't even know if there's a way to encourage the state that if you're hunting in these certain high density areas, why couldn't they just issue bonus tags? And a tag itself doesn't cost much money anyway, but if they allowed that, then honestly, I could easily take 2 or 3 deer, and I would take them to, I know you can take them up to Browns and different places, and the one off in Wright Cities, they'll process it and send it to a food bank. So is there anything like that just for the guys that are already out hunting, and just as a way to further that, reduction? I don't know, Sergeant, do you have any information on that?
Well,
I can answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the statistics that are kept on deer hunting in St. Louis County, I mean, I think all the data that's available is relative to the managed hunts that are sponsored by the Department of Conservation or the Department of Natural Resources. The statistical or keeping of statistics just generally in the county are very non-specific, so they don't get broken down to specific geographical areas. It's just the entire county. So, but then as far as trying to allow for more hunting and issuing permits to landowners and residents, I think that was one of the components of the plan and recommendations that we would seek out in the future in working with the Department of Conservation to try and increase the actual harvest, and to encourage and make it possible for landowners to harvest more deer. But that certainly involves, ongoing communication and authorization from the Department of Conservation. But I think that was something that we'd like to consider being pursued in the future as well.
Larry, the managed hunts have limit codes, and it's an antlerless deer or 1 deer of either sex or 2 deer, but you have to check out an antlerless deer first and all those kinds of, I think there's like a dozen limit codes, but many counties in Missouri let you get as many additional deer tags as you want. And you can, if they have a population problem, so that's kind of baked into the Conservation Department's procedures. There wouldn't be any problem with that. The trouble is archery, the success rate for the limit, the deer allowed by permit to kill versus the deer that are killed is like 10 or 12%. And so you never get to the point where there are a handful of folks that are successful or skillful, like yourself, for example, that can kill several deer. I can shoot one right now. I can, and you can.
Hey, Rob, no,
Yeah.
don't shoot it right now.
Yeah. Well,
Brad is
I have been offered a hardship permit several times, but I don't want the hassle and the mess. But the folks up at K&A Meats will process it for $80 and give it to the food bank. But, you know, and I could kill 10 or 20 or just whatever. And I have about 3 rifles that if I do my job, it's a matter of choosing which eye I want to shoot it through. And that's the truth. But I generally don't do my job these days, but that's the possibility. But anyway, the success for archers is just, it just doesn't support the idea that we can get rid of, you know, 2,500 deer wildwood wide when we can only hunt in half of it because the rest of it is subdivisions that are quite dense. So I would like to submit these statistics to someone that'll actually look at them, or maybe I can talk to Erin. I've talked to her before, and kind of figure out what the heck they're thinking. And because I don't think we're going to get anywhere. Larry, despite your experience, how big was the common ground? Because I like my privacy, and I had a guy that was haranguing me. He was a delivery driver for a parcel service, and he was haranguing me to hunt, and he talked a good game, and he had game cameras all around, and he talked about, oh, he just likes the meat and he doesn't trophy hunt. Well, after he captured a 14-point buck on one of his game cameras close to my property line, he came and begged me to hunt. And I had told him no. So he went to my neighbor, who's a nice guy, and said, hey, can I hunt? And he put his stand.
Rob, if I may. Come on,
Yeah.
we do have to move on here. I appreciate what you're saying, but we.
No, my point was that the stand is 180 feet from my home. I made him move it and take it down, but he could see, you know, theoretically see right in my home. And it's intrusive in a lot of neighborhoods, and I'm not sure how much support you'll get in most neighborhoods with smaller lots. That was my point.
All right. Lauren, I've got you with your hand up. Let me make a comment before then. Interest of time and moving ahead. It sounds to me like our committee tonight, we have a couple of options. One is to say the plan as submitted should be taken to the council for their further consideration and possible ordinance changes. The second is we've raised enough questions that we have that it's not ready to go before council, and that we should submit it back to the Public Safety Committee and the Deer Management Program with specific, as Robert's pointed out, some specific questions that need to be resolved before we move forward. I see those are the two, probably the two ways. I guess option 3 is we throw up our hands and say, nothing works. We're, you know, end of story. We're not going to have a deer management plan. I guess that is a third option. Okay. So just think about that for a second. Lauren, you're up.
Okay, mulling over what Director Brown said about how it doesn't immediately come with an ordinance already written, and that process would answer a lot of my questions. So on page 1 in that cover letter, you know, it mentions that the plan does not propose that the city fund bait and call or sponsor a managed hunt at this time, and then says the increasing amount of legal hunting is the most economical approach. But we just learned at the beginning of the meeting there's no data to show that it'll do enough. So I think, having been on this council a while and knowing the folks on it, what's going to happen is the Deer Task Force, after a year of evaluating, is going to say we didn't get enough of a dent with increased hunting. We want to encourage a managed hunt or pay for a sharpshooter. And then we're going to have people on council go, but it wasn't in the plan. And I want you to modify the plan first before I'll ever look at something with a fiscal note for it. Whereas if the plan was a little bit more flexible and said, you know, we encourage starting with an increase in hunting due to combination of lots. And if this is not successful, the following steps should be, you know, considered by council. I just think if it's not in the plan, then somebody's going to say nobody's ever talked about it or considered it. We have to talk about it for 3 months. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I can't, I'm okay with amending it first and then sending it back to committee or sending it to council. I mean, I'm okay either way. I don't know what Rob thinks or Dave, what your advice is. I just don't want it to go back to the Deer Task Force and then not come out with that extra flexibility, because I really think we're going to need a couple years of paid hunting in addition to the lot combinations.
Thank you. Rob?
Can I comment, Dave? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I want this to succeed. I want to be real clear about that. And we should fix it in committee before it goes to the council, because as Lauren said, it'll chew up a lot more time. And so I suggest, I'm ready to make a motion to this effect, that we all submit the questions and concerns we have with the current plan to the management subcommittee as we kick it back and give them something to go on, because we asked these guys to go off or guys and gals, I suppose, to go off and figure this out and kind of cut it from whole cloth. Well, now we've got something to react to, and our complaints are not intended, my complaints are not intended to shoot holes throughout this plan. It's just to make it better before it goes to council. So I would make the motion then that we send this back to the management subcommittee and give ourselves, let's say, 2 weeks to document our questions, or a week, or whatever seems appropriate, and send those back at the same time and have them do more work on it.
Okay.
Is that reasonable?
Thanks, Rob. Yes. Is there a second to that?
I maybe, but I have a quick question about that. If I remember right.
Let's get a second first.
Okay.
Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
Larry has a second. Okay, now Lauren.
Yeah, if I remember right, when we got the first draft, didn't we all type our questions up and send them in too? In other
I
words,
did.
I thought I remembered that from before. Maybe not.
This is my first shot at it.
I was
It's
just
been a
wondering if
couple
we've already had this procedure before, and if that's the case, if we've done this before, that we should just add to it here in this committee.
I think most of the questions were at the meeting level. I don't know that we got separate questions. That's my recollection, but if you want to provide them, that might be helpful, so we could try to provide as direct a response as possible.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe it was just expressed at committee and not sent in by email. Is that what you're okay?
Yeah,
I just
I think, Lauren, I think we have had within the committee, we've had some issues, but Rob's raised a lot of stuff tonight. I think really needs to be clarified. And with that specific questions going back to the Deer Committee, they may come back and say, hey, you asked me this question a year ago, and here's my answer back then. Here it is again. Okay, well, fine. We forgot. But I think anyway, we need to do that. Any other discussion on the motion to collect questions over the next 2 weeks and send it back to the Deer Committee for their concerns and consideration? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Oppose?
oppose only because I'd rather keep it in this committee and amend it.
All right. One oppose? Any abstentions? All right, motion passed. Thank you.
Dave, let me just make one suggestion, if I may, please. That everyone put your questions together and then send them directly to Rick. You've made reference to the Deer subcommittee, but let's have one person as the clearinghouse and just send everything to Rick. He'll accumulate them and then get back with Sergeant Wendling and the rest of the committee then. That way it all goes to one person.
Everybody straight with that? Okay. Brad, thanks again for your participation in this. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Moving on, federal funding for Old State. Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Bertolino. This is actually the third federal funding agreement that's come before you in recent months. This is for the Old State Road Shared Use Path project, which I referenced earlier. We applied for this project some time ago, and or maybe earlier this year, and we were successful in our application. The project does propose to construct a new shared use path along essentially the west side of Old State Road. from Nantucket Meadows Drive up to Old State Place. And the idea is to develop a continuous pedestrian facility from Old Fairway Drive connecting all the way up to Ridge Road and Rock Hollow Trail. So the project will also have a connection to Waterfront Way and provide at-grade crosswalks connecting over to Lake Country Lane and Lakeshore Meadows Drive on the other side of Old State Road. So the project application requested $1.4 million for engineering, easement acquisition, and construction. The project would be started in 2024. That's when the construction funds would be available. We did request 80% federal funding, 20% is our local match for this project, and that would amount to $280,000 if I'm correct. So to get these federal funds, as with the prior two projects, we must execute a federal funding agreement with MoDOT. And so the recommendation tonight to the committee is to move forward with the execution of that agreement and to send it to City Council so that we can then authorize those federal funds for the Old State Road Shared Use Path project. And with that, I'll certainly answer any questions from the committee.
Anyone? Any comments? Anyone like to make a motion to that effect? Larry?
Yeah, I'll make motion.
Okay, is there a second? Lauren? Okay. Been moved and seconded that we accept the recommendation of the Public Works Committee and move this forward. All in favor of that? I'm sorry, discussion?
I got
Larry?
Yeah, Rick, on the cost, when I read this, if the costs exceed the 1.4, then Wildwood picks up the balance.
That is correct, Councilmember Brost. With all these federal funding applications and agreements, we get stuck with the balance of costs above the amount of the agreement. There are sometimes options that we can go back and request more funds. So if we come up with a change in the scope or something changes, that is an option. Sometimes I wouldn't guarantee it by any stretch, but generally we get stuck with those costs. That's correct.
Now, when you're going through the engineering, do we engineer toward meeting the project cost? I mean, how comfortable are you with the number? And it might relate to this project, but it's more of a general question too.
Well, I've tried to be conservative, in particular with this project, with what we requested federal funding wise. Clearly, we will try to be thrifty in our design in our project where we can do it. Although there are certainly limits sometimes as to the degree that we can do that. For instance, if we end up 50% above the cost of the project, we're probably not going to be able to go back to East-West Gateway and say we want to reduce the length of it in half. They're going to want to see the original scope of the project completed because that's what we told them we were going to do. So there certainly could be some limits there relative to what we can do to reduce costs. But where we can come up with ideas that are practical and MoDOT agrees to them or the county agrees to them, then we'll certainly do that.
Any other questions for Rick on this? Just Steve, is this one of, I didn't break out our strategic plan sheet. This project is on there, isn't it? And it's
Yes.
yeah, it is. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure it was. Okay. All right. Any other comments? All right, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you. Thanks, Larry. Okay, the next item is a for information item on the vehicle charging station. Is that Steve or Rick? Do you want to comment on that?
Actually, it's both of us. I'll go ahead and start the conversation and then Rick can jump in. It's listed as for information simply because what we wanted to do is just give a very brief update on where we are. We're moving this project forward in terms of gathering information, cost information. We have one vendor that we've been working with, and we are waiting for some cost detail from that particular vendor. But we're engaging a second vendor, and we have a meeting set up week after next when Rick returns from vacation. with that vendor to talk and get a competing proposal to see what they think and the costs, because as a city, we certainly need to get multiple quotes, not just one. So, but we're looking at locations and the best place to draw power from and so forth. So we're just gathering information, and hopefully I'm hopeful that by the next meeting of this committee, then that we'll have some specificity with regards to some costs and some other items. That's my hope, and that's what Rick and I are working towards. Rick, do you want to add anything to that?
No, sir, I don't know that I have anything additional to provide tonight. The original vendor that we spoke with is still working with us to try to come up with some costs for on-street spaces, charging spaces on Main Street, and I was hoping to have those for you tonight, but I just don't have them in hand right now. So I don't have anything to provide you further in that regard, but certainly by the next meeting, I would expect to have them.
Right.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee for Rick or Steve on this? Okay, seeing none, let's move on. Thanks, guys. Move ahead to 4 action item, which is the election of standing committee chairs. And if I recall, the council sent this back to us with a requirement that we, this committee, determine whether we should have a single single procedure that we all agree to, or that we let the Robert's rules stand and say you have options. You have 2 different options on how you select. Should we let that stand? So that's not a great explanation, but I think you understand kind of where we are, and we have to go back to the council with a recommendation on which of those procedures we use. Rob, go ahead.
Before we get into that, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Mr. Young is on this call, and I asked him to be here for this specific item. Perhaps if Mr. Young feels it appropriate, maybe he can give a brief summary of the options before we get into discussion, if that would help the committee, since John drafted this this information to the council and then of course this committee as well. So Dave, would that be?
No, fine. John, please.
Sure. And again, I think, Mr. Chairman, you set it up pretty well, which is there's a couple of options here ultimately for the council to decide. And remember too, that this is to correct a policy that was purportedly and errantly adopted 11 years ago. And the policy impacted not only the election of the chairs of the committees, the standing committees. And again, I'm focusing just on the council standing committees, but also the election of the mayor pro tem as well. And all of these being part of the city council then are subject to Robert's Rules of Order pursuant to the city code. So any policy, if any were to be adopted, would have to be presented in bill form, so as an ordinance. So the policy can be just follow Robert's Rules of Order and let the committees choose which of the 2 options they want, or the policy can be, no, we're all going to have a consistent process and this is what it's going to be. It could be either of these 2 options or whatever other procedure the council prefers. So just to kind of level set that and let you all take it away from there.
Thank you. Lauren, you had your hand up.
Oh,
Lauren.
I think Rob did before me, but I was just going to make a motion to, if we want a policy, and I'm ambivalent on that, but if we do, to go with the roll call election method, which is, in my mind, similar to how the Pope is elected, essentially. And the reason why is I've recently experienced this in committees. It functioned well. You don't have a shouting match and debate over who shouted the name first. And there's no frustration with the person that's been held over as chair, recognizing a favorite person and showing preference. I see how it could get a little sticky if we constantly had to determine the presiding officer was the oldest or serving member of the committee. I guess that would be consecutive years, so we'd have to have somebody, with really good record keeping, right? For the viva voce part. So I really prefer the roll call method, and that's the motion on the floor.
If I may, John.
I'll second.
Wait,
If I may clarify an issue, just prior to the election of the chair, the person who is the acting chair is the person first named on the list of appointees by the mayor.
When you said first name, you
Correct.
didn't mean longest serving, you meant alphabetical?
Because the committee is appointed annually.
Right.
So when the mayor presents that list, the first person named on that list is the person who acts as the acting chair for that meeting. So just to clarify that.
So that would always be Ward 1 because they're listed in ward order.
Unless the mayor decides to change that.
Interesting. Huh.
if I may, John, I'm going to try and get in my simple head, and you keep referring, Lauren, you're referring to roll call and so on. My understanding is the nomination process is the same. It's just the acting chair says we open the floor to nominations and anybody can yell out a name and say, I put that person in the nomination. Doesn't need a second. Their name automatically goes on the board. But then once all the nominations have been made, you either go with a roll call saying, all right, council member A, what's your vote? And you say, I want Tom Smith. The next one says Tom Smith. If Tom Smith gets the majority going down the line, that person's elected. If you don't get a majority, you keep going until you do. The other is it's basically a ballot, and everybody votes at the same time, and the person with the majority wins. If there's no majority, you do the ballot again. If I overstated that, John, it's a simplification, or is that how it's supposed to work?
It's the order of the yelling of. Sorry, I just when I explained it earlier, it's the first name that gets out there is the name that gets voted on first in the viva voce, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't guarantee election. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. So just to clarify on the viva voce, because I think the roll call vote, you're accustomed to it, you understand it. But for the viva voce, what Councilmember Eden said was correct, and Councilmember Bertolino, what you said is correct, is the first person nominated is the first person called for election. And that is accurate. That is the process. That's what Robert's Rules provides. Now, in terms of, any debate, and I will admit that is truly even Robert's Rules recognizes that as the one downside to that process is that the first person called has a bit of a leg up because they're voted up or down. So Robert's Rule says that is the one negative to that process. But in terms of the concerns about, the chair still has to recognize the person. They're not recognized to speak, but the chair has to take some control over recognizing who was called first. But Councilmember Edens, your point is well taken.
What would you call? I'm sorry if I interject one thing, and Tracy, get you next. Rob, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah,
Let me ask one question before we move. And I'll get you next, and then Tracy. If we call via voce, is that really the roll call? Is that the A option, John?
When you say A option, I'm not sure what you're saying.
There's A and B. There's two options. Via voce is the first one. That's the roll call.
The viva voce is the all in favor of Tom Smith, say aye, aye, nay, nay. That's viva voce. Okay. Roll call is you name a person. You're not saying aye or nay.
No, you just lost me there.
All right, so the two processes, viva voce, that's one process. Roll call is another process. Viva voce, your vote is going to be aye or nay on one person. And successive until someone gets a majority. Roll call is, if you've got three candidates, you are going to name your preferred candidate as your vote. That is the roll call process.
Okay,
And you keep going until somebody wins a majority. Councilmember Edens mentioned it's like the election for the Pope. And yeah, that is kind of how it is, except that it's not a secret ballot.
okay, all right.
And there's no smoke.
All right, so are we safe in saying that in terms of identifying these, via voce is one option and the roll call is the second option, or option two? Is it simplified to say that?
Those are the two options available under Robert's Rules of Order.
Okay,
correct?
okay, all right. I'm sorry, Lauren, and Rob, I'm going to come right back to you. What was your motion again, Lauren?
It was to move forward with the roll call election as our policy.
As a roll call, okay? Rob, you seconding that?
Yes, I'm seconding that. And Lauren said it, between you and Lauren, you described it, the problems better than I would. I experienced the same exact deficiency with Viva Voce in the other committee that I'm on. And roll call, I think, is the most neutral and objective way to do it. So I support roll call. But John, I do have a question for John. John, I'm sorry.
Yep.
John, we had this discussion in the parking lot, and you had some observation that seemed valid at the time, but I forgot what it was, concerning a similar deficiency in roll call. You recall what that was? Because I certainly don't.
Sure. And it may have just been at the time that it seemed valid. But the one negative I see to the roll call election is there's less definitiveness to it, especially if you have more than two candidates available, or if you even just have two candidates. Because remember, it is a majority of all those voting, not who has the most votes. That's when you get to move forward. So if you've got an 8-person board and you've got 4 and 4, and you're never going to break those 4 and 4, you are going to perpetually have a tie vote. Now, theoretically, you could have that on the Viva Voce as well. But you could also have it where it's, if you've got 3 members, you could have 3, 3, and 2 and not get anyone off to vote on someone else. Now, an option the council could implement, if you wanted to, is to have a dwindling, kind of I'll call it the Louisiana primary method, which is
fall off.
right, exactly. Which Robert Rules does not have anyone fall off. So that would require.
So the downside is it might take 3 days for the white smoke to come out of the chimney. And there is no tiebreaker, like the mayor can't break the tie or anything like that. So we are that what you just said. Can we make that our process where we toss out the lowest vote getter until we get a consensus? Is that a reasonable modification to Lauren's motion?
You can make that change, yes.
Okay, so I would like to make that amendment.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second for the amendment? Do we have to have a second? I think we do.
I will second it if I can ask with a question, which
Okay.
is, could we also do the roll call if it's tied twice, immediately go to the Viva Voce method?
Yes.
I mean, I'm not trying to overcomplicate it, but that might be easier than actually dropping people off. Because what happens is, if you like more than one person, and you know, like, let's say I love Rob and I love Dave, and I would just say whoever we vote on first gets my vote. Well, then that's when the competition to shout out and be recognized by the chair and who the chair may like best really matters, because you know, it would keep people from wanting to offend anybody, and it just, that's when the unfairness could come in. So It needs to either dwindle or go back to viva voce, whichever Attorney Young recommends is what I would have done it as. But
Okay, we got to discuss and vote on this amendment before we go any farther. So discussion of the amendment. I have one question, John. If we take this modified roll call approach, are we violating Robert's Rules of Order?
It would require a legislative amendment. And that legislative amendment would that would be consistent with our ordinances. I would put it in the section about the standing committees.
Okay, Rob or Lauren, and excuse my ignorance here, but can you put this motion in a little bit more procedural language? In other words, I know where you're going. You're going with, if we have a roll call vote and there's no majority, what you're saying is then the least vote getter drops off. Is that what you're saying?
well,
I'm deferring to Lauren because I'm done with the
there
usual
could be a
tonight. So
tie. There could be a tie right away, so you couldn't just say the least has to drop off, right? So you could say if there is more than one vote that is tied, that we either go to another method, or with multiple nominees and no clear winner, and then use the drop-off method, if that makes sense. I didn't word that well at all, but in my mind, there's two scenarios, right? One is where you repeatedly tie, and one is where you don't have a majority. So you'd have to have language to address both of those.
What I might suggest, based on the motion and discussion, is that the adoption of the Roberts Rules method for roll call election, with the proviso that if there are more than two candidates for chair, that after, let's say, two votes where no winner has been declared, that after the second vote, the lowest vote getter drops off. Now, you
Well-
could theoretically have two of the lowest vote getters be tied. So,
Right. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A possible alternative, I'll just throw this out, and Mr. Chair, I don't know if you can see on your screen, Mr. Hopper has had his hand raised on the screen since the beginning of this conversation. So
I do see it. Thank you. I just saw it.
all right, just wanted to point that out to you. Now, Mr. Young can weigh in if this is something that can be done. So at the beginning of the committee, as Mr. Young pointed out, one person assumes the chairmanship temporarily and takes control of the meeting while this process goes on. If, let's just say that this committee decides to do the roll call election, if there's two candidates and it's a tie the first time around, 4-4, and you go around a second time, 4-4, and maybe if you choose to do it a third time, I don't know, but let's say it's you 2 or 3 times. At that point, what you could do, supposedly, I guess, John, weigh in, but suspend it at that point. Let the person who is acting as the chair of the committee continue with the meeting. Just stop that voting, and then put it back on the agenda for the next time. And perhaps between that month and the next month, something changes so you don't have it, rather than going around in circles. And then we have to change with legislation and everything else. Maybe you do it 2 or 3 times, and then we say after that we're just going to postpone it until the next time. John, is that possible?
yes.
Nate,
Yeah,
I'm
just-
sorry. I apologize, Nate. I didn't see your hand up. Go ahead.
No problem. So I guess just more my opinion than anything is it really seems, I think, in a smaller structure, I really agree with Councilmember Edens and Councilmember Rambo that we really, I think just the roll call makes more sense, and the structure that we have, I see the issue that could pop up pretty often in the Viva Voce, where, like I said, you're kind of scrambling to see who gets nominated first, whether it would be a situation that gets that heated anyway. But I think I think it makes sense what has been recommended. I think, again, just kind of sharing my opinion of, we have a roll call election. If there's, more than 2 people, obviously, then whoever gets the lowest amount of votes or whatever at the end of it, that they would drop off and go into the next round of election. I don't know that you'd even need to go through multiple rounds of elections before you drop the lowest person off. I think just in the interest of efficiency and time, you don't want to have a first committee meeting where you're trying to elect a chairman and you spend 4 hours going through different rounds of roll call votes. But, I think having a roll call vote with the drop off seems to be the way that would make the most sense and be the most fair, to kind of keep the process moving. But, you're not, again, scrambling, or there's no shouting matches or arguments between those. So really just want to voice my opinion. I think the roll call absolutely makes the most sense. So I was in favor of that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might make a suggestion, because we do have a number of permutations of this process, but obviously the roll call election seems to be the preferred method based on the discussion, and I'm open to being corrected on that. What I could do is, before the next meeting, come up with multiple permutations of that process that has options for a termination of the process, for you to review and look at a little bit more concretely instead of theoretically.
We have a main motion and another motion to amend on the floor.
I can withdraw my second on the amendment, or just help withdraw the motion so that we can just motion that the city attorney comes back. I'd like to withdraw.
Rob, you okay with the withdrawal of the amendment? Okay. And who made the original motion?
I
Did
think
you do
Rob
that?
did, and I seconded that as well.
So you both are willing to withdraw those motions this time? Okay, so we have no motion on the floor. John, once again, what is your option that you've just presented to us?
What I will do is take the roll call election from Robert's rules and just add in a couple of options for you to choose from on how that process could be concluded, with an explanation on the benefits and detriments of each.
Okay. Without objection, is everyone okay with John's approach, and we put this on the agenda for next month? Without objection? All right. Thank you, John, for breaking the tie. Sort of. Appreciate that. Okay. Okay, moving right along. Discussion item, metal detectors for the council meetings. And this has been discussed briefly in the past. Steve, or maybe even Brad, would you like to sort of tee up this issue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll tee it up. A little history. I think I alluded to it last night at council meeting, that when we were going through a year and a half ago, putting in the safety measures for the police department, we purchased the metal detector using Prop P funds and a wand. We set up a procedure, and we have followed that for court night, and that will occur again tomorrow. Tomorrow being the first night of in-person appearances since the start of the pandemic. But back then, when we had made that purchase, I had made a suggestion to the council while we were on that topic, that about seeing if we wouldn't use it for council meetings. Since we had the discussion last evening about various things in our closed session, it seemed appropriate to bring that back up. But I had already put it on the agenda when we put the agenda together, Rick and I, last week, in hopes that we could revisit this topic to where at a council meeting, and there are some municipalities that even use it for P&Z meetings. But if we were to utilize that metal detector and require the folks entering council chambers to go through the metal detector. Interestingly enough, the mayor called me today and asked if I would reach out to my counterparts at some of the other municipalities about those that actually do use a metal detector for a council meeting. If the mayor, the council members, and staff were required to pass through that in addition to the folks, the residents, or whomever that is attending a council meeting in person. So anyway, that's kind of the backstory. We have the equipment, we have a process in place that we use for the court that could be implemented potentially for a council meeting. But obviously it's in front of this committee now to discuss the pros and cons and whether that makes sense. You heard the captain speak that, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think he said it himself last night. He's in favor of that. We discussed, but things can happen. We're going to obviously look into some other issues, but anyway, that just kind of gives you some background information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Open for discussion, pros, cons, or whatever. Everyone have any comments? Larry?
Yeah, I would certainly be in favor of it. I think if we're going to err on being safe, and I wouldn't be opposed to what's good for anyone's good for all of us. So that there's no reason I would object to us walking through it as well. So, but I think it's an asset. It's already paid for. We might as well use it and help protect us.
Thank you, Larry. Nate, I got you, and then Lauren.
I'm just agree with what Larry just said, that, it's, if we have the equipment, there's really essentially not an immense addition of cost or anything to already have it set up and going. Again, I don't see any reason if we have the equipment and it's an extra measure of safety, I have no problem walking through a metal detector, whether, if it's there to use. So I think, any level of safety you can add to a situation, if we have the stuff there for it, I don't really see a negative to it.
Thank you. Lauren?
Same thing, support this as well. The only thing I could see is a council member running in at the last minute, and you might take them before a citizen that was at the front of the line, which could be perceived as rude, so that they could get in and vote. And as long as there was some sort of understanding that if, a staff member had to run in, that they would kind of be bumped in quicker. But I would subject myself to the same thing I would ask citizens to do. I think it would be unfair for us not to go through it if citizens had to. So it's all or nothing. And I support it.
Rob?
Yeah, real quick. Steve, do you know how cumbersome this would become? In other words, you just walk right through and hand your bag to an officer and he roots through the bag or whatever. Would there be a significant line and backup for the meeting? I tend to support it just because everybody else does, and it's a safety thing, and we got the equipment, but I'm wondering if it would be a real hassle, like, getting on a plane. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, I'm going to defer, and I'm going to ask Sergeant Wendling to talk, because they're involved with how we handle court night. There would be a protocol of how we would handle it. I mean, if we start having full council chambers with folks coming in meetings, how we would stage that. But Sergeant Wendling is pretty much the expert. So, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd ask Sergeant Wendling to answer that question.
Yeah, please do.
Sure. Yeah, it basically just relates to the volume of people that you have coming through. So if we were anticipating that there would be large attendance at a particular meeting, we might, staff heavily. So the screening process would be, quicker than it would. I mean, typically, I think generally what we do for court nights, we staff the screening with about 3 officers that are totally dedicated to screening. So, 2 officers can be searching a bag at the same time. So you're basically, have a pretty good flow through, the screening process. And if there were going to be a large crowd anticipated, we could probably double that staffing just to increase the screening rate to accommodate to where I don't think we would really have any significant backup just based on the way that I've observed, attendees coming into the building for meetings. Generally, it's kind of a trickle in, with exception to those nights where there might be a very controversial topic on the agenda where you would have a capacity crowd. Then you would probably have a little bit of a wait time, but I don't think it would be excessive.
Good enough. Steve, do you know how much that cost? The facility that we have, roughly?
The metal detector?
Yeah.
It's been 2 years.
I mean, we could track it if it wound up being a problem, right? I mean, it's not 100,000 or anything like that, is it?
For some reason, I was thinking like 60,000, but I really don't know if that's accurate. I don't hold me to that. I don't remember what it was, but I can find out. Where were you? What were you suggesting, that perhaps get a second one?
No, I'm just thinking if it does turn out to be burdensome for people to have a line, a long line to get into the council meeting, people probably get used to it, but doesn't really send the right message, in my view. But I was thinking, we could just track it and have, 2 people passing through. But if it's that expensive, that's a stupid idea. So it was worth asking. That's all.
I will go back into the records, because I'm sure I've got the bill filed. So I'll look into that just to let you all know, and I'll send an email out to the council. Or I'm sorry.
Sure.
That's right.
Thank you.
Nate, you had your hand up before, and you moved on my screen. Is your hand still up?
No, appreciate it. It didn't go down when I clicked it before, I guess.
Okay, all right, good enough. Steve, I heard you say that you want to, at the direction of the mayor, reach out to some of the other municipalities to get their experience. So are you saying that this committee should give you at least another till our next meeting to bring this issue up again so you can report back?
Nope, because I already did it. The mayor
Oh.
called me at about 2 o'clock, and I jumped on it right away. So just to give you an idea, the city of Ellisville, they used to have a metal detector for their council meetings and for their P&Z meetings. They used to, but they don't do that anymore. And Bill Schwer, who is my counterpart at Ellisville, didn't really know why they stopped doing it. Manchester, city of Manchester, they don't use metal detectors. Town and Country, they do use metal detectors, but not the residents go through it, but the staff and the mayor and the council members do not go through that because of the layout of their building. Council members can come in a side door, they check their mail and so forth, and so they're allowed to go to their seat and so forth. So they do not. Baldwin, they use it for court only, but not for council meetings. And I had not heard back today from the city of Chesterfield. But what I told the mayor when he asked about it and so forth, I said when I had brought this idea forth, I always contemplated that everyone passed through that. I mean, there's no reason that we wouldn't. And I think the optics are bad that not everyone, shouldn't pass through that. Mayor, council members, and staff. That's at least what I contemplated when I put this idea forth.
I got Rob, did you have your hand up?
No, Steve answered my question. I was going to ask exactly the same thing.
Okay, Rick?
While you were talking, I did pull up the resolution from 2019. I believe that the cost wasn't any more than $7,000, quite frankly.
Well,
Okay.
that was way off.
I don't know if Sergeant Wendling, if that rings a bell to you or not. To me, I recall it to be less than 10 grand.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident it was less than $10,000. For some reason, 8,000 stuck in my mind, so that should probably be about right.
Thanks, Rick. Comment would be for me is if we did implement this, wouldn't we have to say that anybody who leaves the chamber and comes back in must go back through the metal detector? So that council members, when we leave, and let's say we're going to go into a closed session in the community room, by all rights, we should have to go back through the metal detector to go back into the main chamber. Is that, am I making too much of this, or is that procedurally sound like what we have? If you really have a secure system that says that anybody's in that chamber has gone through the metal detector and you can't leave it and then come back without going back through it again. Am I? Anybody else following that logic?
Could
I
I
see.
comment?
Lauren?
I was gonna say, you also meant like if we would leave and go out to the bathroom, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Just my comment. Rob?
Yeah, I was I happened to be at City Hall a couple times when there was court in process, and I think they just screened everybody coming through the door. Is that a possibility or an option? And we can just regulate the stairs or something, and that way, once we're in and checked, because the mayor puts 3-minute time limits on our bathroom visits, which are kind of tough to adhere to. And I don't want to, wind up in a situation where we've got another queue and it takes 20 minutes to reconvene. That would be my concern.
Steve?
Well, let's see here. I think Councilmember Rambo hit it a little bit, but I'm trying to put this in the proper words. If a council member were to leave the chambers and go out the back door in the hallway or whatever, and then came back in through that way, that would be problematic in my mind. I would probably want to close off that hallway so that isn't used. Because I'll give you an example, and this is a real example. Previous council, as you all know, was not quite as cordial to each other and didn't work as well together as you all do. And I witnessed many times what almost came to blows and fights and everything else. And there was one instance where a council member left the council. I mean, literally got up while the council was sitting there and went out that back door. I will tell you that I was absolutely worried that person was potentially could go out to the back parking lot to the car and get a gun and come in and start shooting. I was that worried, and I voiced that concern. So if we were to do this, if someone, I really would not want a council member leaving and then coming back in through that back door without passing through that metal detector. It's not that I don't trust any one of you or the rest of the council for that matter, but I've seen, I saw firsthand what could have been a bad situation. So Sergeant Wendling, you started to say something too.
I was just going to add that on court nights, we control the main entrance to the building, and certainly having during court, public doesn't have access to those restricted areas in City Hall. So that is a valid point you're making for those areas that you would definitely need to, I think it would be manageable to enact some protocols to make it manageable, that those areas are secured prior to anybody entering the facility for a meeting. We would, conduct a sweep of all the areas and make sure that there's no weapons or anything. And, if it's a concern, that somebody may place a weapon somewhere and attempt to retrieve it, there's certain things that we could do to eliminate that as a possibility. But generally, I mean, you could just enact a rule that unless it's an emergency, nobody's to enter the rear corridor area. And as long as that is, if everybody would be agreeable to follow that rule, then I think we would really only need to screen people initially when they enter the building. I think that would be sufficient if you restrict access to certain areas where somebody would be unmonitored.
If I may, folks, it seems like there's two levels here. The council is asking this committee to assess the rationale for yes or no, do we have metal detectors for the council meetings? That's kind of, to me, that's kind of the big the big issue for us. The procedures on how we would implement that, sort of the B issues. Is it possible that we could say that there's a motion that this committee believes that we should implement metal detector screening for all council meetings, and that the council should delegate or ask the Board of Public Safety in cooperation with our precinct to come up with the procedures that for implementation of that to secure the full area, so that we kill both of these without us trying to get down into the weeds and figure out how you do it. Sounds like, you know, Sergeant Wendling and the police kind of have that in order. So is someone willing to make a motion that we do recommend to the council that we implement the metal detectors for council meetings, and also to pass or delegate to the Board of Public Safety through this committee the procedures to be developed for implementation? Steve?
If you want, if this committee wants, I think what you just said is logical in terms of going back to the council, which we were asked to do with the recommendation, or you all were asked to do with recommendation from this committee. But rather than kicking it to another committee, if you would like, I can work with Sergeant Wendling and the police to come up with a draft of protocols and so forth, and then we can present it back to this committee, you know, at the next meeting or something like that, rather than kicking it to another committee. If you wanted, I would offer that.
All right, thank you. And I don't want to push us down the road too quickly. I mean, have we really exhausted the discussion about yes or no? Do we really want the metal detectors? We haven't talked at all about sort of the optics of it to our citizens. Will they feel safer or not safer coming into a room like that? Will they feel it's overreach in terms of lack of transparency in some ways, that we're restricting people? I don't know. We haven't really said much. We kind of got right into Steve's survey of the others and then kind of jumped ahead. Do we need more discussion of this before we move forward? Lauren?
Oh, I think we're absolutely going to have it pushed back, but that doesn't mean it won't be the right thing to do. And it seems like we're kind of all on the same consensus track, and we might end up with a silent majority that's okay with it, and just have a few vocal citizens that are not okay with it. Administrator Cross, when you look at those options, if it's only $7,000 or $8,000, you know, for a second one, I mean, maybe the easiest option is to put one upstairs and one downstairs, and that takes care of the entrances. And so that once you've been cleared as a council member, there's no problem with us getting up and running to the bathroom as quick as we can, especially since the women's one is closed downstairs. We're running up and down a lot, and so would our citizens. And so that might be an option. Just have two.
I would defer to Sergeant Wendling again with the chair's permission, because again, there's a manpower issue. So we'd have to make sure that that Sergeant Wendling believes that we've got the staff to handle 2 metal detectors. You know, the back doors should be locked. I mean, there's ways of securing the building, locking the back door so nobody comes in the back door and then everyone comes in the front door, but potentially having 2 metal detectors there if there was a concern on the flow of people. But again, I'm going to defer to the expert, Sergeant Wendling, on where the best placement of, if we had 2 metal detectors, where he would suggest we put them.
Yeah, it would just depend ultimately on what access you wanted to provide. If you wanted both sets of doors to be open, then you would have to do that, have screening at both entrances. So yeah, it would, the thing is then, if there's a high attendance at a meeting, then, you know, the fact that you have 2 metal detectors isn't going to help you out in that situation if they're at 2 different locations, because you're going to have different volumes entering the different entrances. So in effect, I think that would, potentially cause some issues if you split the metal detectors up. I think that we could find a workable solution and just having one entrance, but doing some things and protocols to where we would be able to allow access to the entire interior of the building to anybody that's gone through the screening, and just ensure that, there's no weapons inside the building, prior to the meeting, and then making sure that everybody that enters is screened, at the one entrance, then we'll know that nobody has any weapons inside the building altogether.
I don't think that many people come in the back door anyway. I think, John Young uses the back door and a couple council members use the back door, but certainly no one from the public comes in, because that door's locked at 5 p.m. So no one's coming in there who doesn't have key card access. But if they come in, again, they have to come downstairs and ultimately pass through the metal detector downstairs before they got into council chambers. So, but like I say, that back door is locked at 5 p.m.
Would someone like to make a motion?
Are we moving that it goes to Steve and you work that out and come back to us? Is that what we're thinking of right now?
Yeah, Steve's, repeat your option, Steve. What you said you think we should do before maybe moving this to council?
Well, I think right now, what council said last night was that it came to this committee to decide if we want to move forward with having a metal detector on council night. So I think the first order of business is for this committee to decide if you want to do that. First of all, if you feel that having a metal detector is the right thing to do. So if there is a majority vote on that particular motion, assuming a motion is made, then the mechanics of and we can report that back to council 2 weeks from now. But we could also say that and then assume it. Well, I guess what we could do then is, assuming full council takes your recommendation and goes forward, then I could work with the police then and come back to council or the committee with the actual protocol. But I think right now what needs to be decided by this committee and then by council, if we put it on the agenda for 2 weeks from now or something, to find out if the full council is in favor. If the committee's in favor and the full council's in favor of having a metal detector, then we'll work out the details.
Right. Larry?
Yeah, I'd like to make that motion that that we implement the metal detectors for the residents and council, staff, mayor, and with the approval of the city council, to go ahead and have the city administrator and the police department come up with the actual implementation procedures.
Is there a second for that motion? Lauren seconded it. Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstains? Motion passes. Thank you, Larry. Okay, moving right along. The next item was that was actually a for information item, but we turned it into an action item, didn't we, Steve? So, okay.
No, that actually wasn't for action.
That wasn't for, okay. It was?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
it was. I'm sorry. Yes, it was. Just no. Okay.
So thank you for that action.
All right, the last one is a flag disposal box. Steve?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, there's an attachment to this agenda item. A young man who is in Boy Scout Troop 677 reached out to Mr. Garitano, asked if he, as an Eagle Project, could put a flag disposal box somewhere at Wildwood City Hall. Mr. Garitano then passed that request to me. it's interesting that apparently the city of Wildwood is one of the few cities that actually accept flags for the proper disposal. And it is noted on our website that we do in fact do that. However, in looking into this, unbeknownst to me, that we have had as many as 14 32-gallon trash bags of used flags dropped on our front door. So it has turned into a major headache in terms of how to dispose of them. We have had our parks personnel actually go to VFW halls and Lions clubs and so forth, hoping that they would take them. And they said, we're full up and we can't. So we whittled it down ultimately to 2 remaining trash bags full, which I then put in my car last Friday and in a conversation with my next door neighbor who is a Marine and has a son in a Boy Scout troop, because there actually is in a Boy Scout troop, there is a ceremony where they properly dispose of the flags, and it's something that the scouts go through and so forth. I'm sure my sons went through that, but it was many years ago, so I don't remember it anymore. But anyway, so what the gentleman, my next door neighbor said is they would take all the flags that we have to offer. However, if this committee would recommend it and say, let's go forward with this young man so that he can complete his Eagle project and put together a disposal box. If you so chose to do so, we could say, well, that's great. People can drop them off, but we would like you and your troop to monitor that and clean out that box once a week and take it back to your troop and then properly retire those flags. So that did not fall on city staff to somehow dispose of those flags. And I think that's an appropriate caveat to this and saying, sure, that's a great thing, but also take care of the box and take care of the flags that are deposited in that box. But it's before the committee now to decide if we want to do that and how we would go about, putting a flag disposal box at the front entrance or the back entrance or something like that. Now, because we've had some things like that before. So the front doors are locked at a certain time, maybe 10 p.m. The back doors, anyone can get into that vestibule area and the back parking lot. They can't get in the building, but they can get in there so that because we've had boxes for, to donate shoes and other things. And that turned into a nightmare again. That vestibule area was overflowing with shoes or whatever. So we could do it, but I think it might be appropriate. And I think it would be a good thing for the scout to commit also to coming and picking up, once a week or once every 2 weeks, any flags that, checking out that box. I think that's appropriate. But anyway, that's the whole spiel. I'll stop.
All right. Any discussion on this or anyone like to make a motion?
I will. If Steve supports it, I support it. I'd like to make a motion that we allow this scout to put in a flag disposal box.
Is there a second to the motion? Larry? All right. Moved and seconded to have a box. Any discussion? Lauren?
Yeah, just that the motion didn't contain the wording that Steve suggested, which is that the Boy Scouts troop should be designated to be in charge of disposal of the flags and monitoring the flags have been placed in there for removal. So I'd like to amend the motion on the floor to include that language.
Is the maker okay with that?
Sure. I rely on Lauren to backstop me on all those kinds of procedural matters.
Yeah. Because you're right, Lauren, because the original motion was just put a box in.
Yeah. And
that's
then to Steve's point too, maybe we could suggest that the Boy Scouts, just as a cautionary measure, perhaps lacquer it if it's built out of wood so that it would have some level of waterproofing in case we decide that the best method is to leave it out front outside under the awning so that it looks nice. So we might just want to suggest that it can go indoor or outdoor when it is built. Does that sound like that would help fix that problem? Okay.
Yes.
Does that have to be part of the motion or can that be ancillary to the motion? The main motion is that they that they will provide a box and be responsible for its maintenance and disposal on a weekly basis.
I think it can just be that the direction of the direction to staff is when we notified the Boy Scouts that we ask them to make it in such a way that we can put it inside or outside.
Which does not need to be part of the.
Does not need to be part of the motion.
No, I think the motion, as you all have proposed it, which is to give the Boy Scout, this young man, the authorization to go ahead and build one and make sure that they take care of it. But in my sidebar discussions, to say because we'll have to find a spot to put it, and if it's going to be outside, we'll want to make sure that it is weatherproof. But that's kind of that's an aside conversation with him.
Carla, you okay with? You got it in there? Okay. All right. We have a moving second for the Boy Scouts to provide a box and take care of the maintenance and disposal. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Sounds like a good move. Okay, that is the last agenda item that we have for discussion or action. Anything miscellaneous, Rob?
Yeah, Dave, upon further reflection, I really think Lauren was right, and we should try to fix the deer management plan in committee rather than sending it back, maybe with Sergeant Wendling, yourself, since you're the safety liaison, I guess Steve, and I want to participate, and whoever else wants to play. So I would like to move that we reconsider that direction and keep the plan in committee.
Is there a second for that?
You cannot vote on anything that is under miscellaneous.
Under miscellaneous, yeah, that's true. John, what's the remedy here?
Well, the item is on the agenda and it was voted on, and a motion to reconsider what was voted upon previously is an appropriate item at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, is inappropriate?
It is appropriate.
Appropriate. Okay. All right. So you want to move to reconsider, Rob?
Yes, I think we should keep it in committee. The team had a long shot at it. We'll probably leverage their expertise at some points. Sergeant Wendling probably knows most of what we need to know if we take a shot at it. And I just think it's less cumbersome and it makes sense for us to take our shot at it.
John, do we have to have a vote on the reconsideration and then come back with another motion, as Rob just stated?
So the process is going to be that you first vote on the motion to reconsider, which has to be seconded. Then you have the motion that was originally made before you again. You can either vote it up or down, or someone can make a motion to amend it.
Okay. So Rob, you made a motion to reconsider the previous approval. Is there a second for that? Lauren, all right, it's been moved and seconded that we reconsider our original vote on the deer management issue. All in favor of reconsideration, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, the motion passes. Now we can go back to the original motion, right, John? And ask if we can amend that, right? All right, Carla, is it possible to reread the original motion on deer management?
I'm getting there. Was to return the plan for modifications with committee members submitting questions and concerns to Rick in 2 weeks forward towards the redraft of a plan.
So the original motion, if I'm hearing it, we didn't say we would send it to council, right? We said
Correct.
we'd reconsider it within this committee with with questions and answers to the next meeting. So Rob, are we really about where we should have been on this?
I think we decided to kick it back to the committee, the deer management committee, and they've spent a long time on it, and we've seen some flaws that won't fly in council, and so it's more appropriate for us to fix it here. And so my my suggestion, I'm not sure what I have to do. John Young will have to help me with this, but my hope is to get us to just reconsider this with the appropriate group here in the ANPW committee.
Gotcha. Lauren, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I think I can fix it, which was essentially to kind of amend that original motion. So we've done the first step, which is to keep it here. But, you know, Dave, you're the liaison to the Board of Public Safety. You know, Rob, you're a hunter. Larry, you're a hunter. I have no problem with deputizing the three of you or two of you or whoever of you three that wants to do it, and basically form a little, you know, subcommittee unofficially and just have some Zoom meetings with Sergeant Wendling and City Administrator Cross. And if, you know, if John Young wants to be present or Director Brown, that would be great. We've done this in Public Works when we've been working on the policy for lobbyists. You get a lot more work done. You guys can work on what you think needs to be written and added to that so that the next time we come back to the committee, the language that you want to see added is already there and in front of us, and we don't need, you know, three other committees or three other committee meetings to talk about drafts going back and forth. So I'd like you guys to get it to where you want to see it and then come back to us. And then, you know, even as a courtesy in the very end, when we're happy with it, we could always, even as a courtesy, send it to the Deer Task Force for their approval, or we could just send it directly, you know, to council as well. But I think the key is for, you know, you three, unless somebody else wants to do it, you know, plus staff, to have some Zoom meetings and get the wording done. So that's my amendment.
Okay, Carla?
Yeah, who are the three persons again?
Well, I didn't really ask their permission. I know Rob would do it, but I thought Dave and Larry would be good as well. But if they don't want to do it, that's okay too. I just know we have two hunters and one and Dave is the liaison to Board of Public Safety. So that's where I came about.
Larry, you okay with that? If it's a committee of three?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, all right. So the motion, can you restate the motion then, Lauren?
Yes, is so that so when Carla read it, we were still allowed to email our questions in. So let's still do that. So let's still have the full committee email our questions to Rick Brown or our concerns. And then after those are received for Mr. Cross, Sergeant Wendling, Councilmember Bertolino, Councilmember Rambo, Councilmember Brost, and or any other staff member to have independent meetings as necessary to come up with a revised draft for a vote by the next meeting, if possible, of Public Works.
Is there a second to that? Rob is seconded. All right, it's been moved and seconded. John?
Just by a point of information for the benefit of the committee, there's no such thing as an informal committee. If these folks are appointed by this committee, they will be subject to sunshine law, which means posted meetings, public meetings, just to be clear.
We can do that. Okay, thank you, John. Okay, any further discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? And abstain? Okay, we've now bounced that back to the three of us, and we will get on our bikes and see how far we can get with this before the next meeting then.
Mr. Chair, just as a procedural item, that was a motion to amend the original motion that was before the committee. So
Yeah.
now would be an appropriate time to vote on the motion as amended.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much. Okay. Is there a motion now to, how do you want to say it, John, to approve the motion as amended?
Correct.
All right. Is there a motion for that?
Sure.
Rob, is there a second? Larry? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the amendment to the original motion. Did I say that correctly, John? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstain? Motion passes. All right. So we have it back. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks for letting me volunteer you for extra meetings.
I'm
Thanks,
just-
Sergeant Wendling.
Yeah, and I'm not
Again.
sure I have Sergeant Wendling's contact info, and he's going to be a key part of that discussion. So maybe I can get that from you.
Yes.
What we'll do, since we now have a formal subcommittee, which will require a recorder and minutes and et cetera, that will fall to Rick and I to coordinate those meetings,
Cool.
which we will do with the three gentlemen and Sergeant Wendling, Rick and I, and anybody else. So just like we do with this one, we'll put all that together. That's what we do as staff. So it has to be handled just like this meeting.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Any other miscellaneous items? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Larry, so moved. Lauren, seconded. Non-debatable. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you very much, folks. Longer than anticipated, but I really appreciate everyone's attention and details tonight. Thank you so much.